Hi, it's Dwyer, GamblersAdvisory.com, with some thoughts on a fight that's going to be on ESPN's Friday Night Fights between Karim Mayfield, 13-0 with 8 KOs, and he's taking on Steve 2-Pound Forbes, 35-9 with 11 KOs. The fight is scheduled for June 17th. Now, before I go further, remember the opinion you should follow should be your own. Just consider this video to be a second opinion from a complete stranger online. I have not seen the line for this fight. I like to analyze fights outside of the lines. But I believe since Steve Forbes has lost some recent fights, Harrison Coelho, Jojo Dan, and since Steve Forbes is 34 years old, I'm expecting him, since he's fighting a younger, unbeaten fighter, to be the underdog in this fight, or at least an even money play. I like Steve Forbes in this fight. There is a lot to like about Karim Mayfield, who calls himself hard hitter, but at this stage in their careers, I think Forbes is going to pull the upset. I like the older man in this one. Let's talk about both of these fighters. Mayfield is an unbeaten Bay Area fighter who is generating some buzz. He sparred with Manny Pacquiao. Style-wise, in my opinion, and opinions are always controversial, style-wise, Mayfield is an ambush fighter. Stays outside, jumps in with hooks, then goes back outside. Right? Usually his hand speed and his power rule the day, and he's able to knock opponents out. He has 8 knockouts in 13 fights, or he's able to simply overwhelm an opponent with ambush power shots. The problem here, in my opinion, is that Steve Forbes is impossible to knock out. Look at his record. He has never been stopped. Not only that, Forbes is a defensive wizard. In other words, a ambush fighter against Steve Forbes is a guy who, quite frankly, is asking for trouble, because ambush fighters typically don't have the volume to overwhelm a defensive fighter like Forbes. Let me go one step further. Like Bernard Hopkins, and this fight in some ways is like Bernard Hopkins against Jean Pascal. Like Bernard Hopkins, although Forbes is 34 years old, understand Forbes' skill set is such that it will age well. In other words, don't view Forbes as an over-the-hill fighter. Rather, technique-wise, Steve Forbes has the kind of defensive technique that promotes longevity. As it is, he's never been stopped. Right? When you're in the ring with him, he's hard to hit. He's a very smooth, a very slick boxer. And understand, he has faced some of the stiffest competition in the sport. He faced Oscar De La Hoya years ago. De La Hoya was unable to stop him. De La Hoya won the fight, but Forbes, who is a former super featherweight champion many years ago, Steve Forbes was able to go the distance. Forbes fought Andre Berto. Steve Forbes again, against Berto, who has explosive punching power, was able to go the distance. Right? Steve Forbes fought Demetrius Hopkins in a fight I thought he won. They gave the decision to Demetrius Hopkins, so it goes. But again, Steve Forbes was able to go the distance. The Jojo Dan fight, his last fight, I believe I made a video on that fight when I picked Dan to beat Forbes based on Dan's volume. But understand, in that fight, although that fight was stopped in the middle of the fight because of a headbutt, it was stopped due to, not a knockout, but a non-knockout. Steve Forbes was in that fight as well. I believe on the judges' scorecards, he lost that fight by 2 rounds. Right? That stoppage wasn't a knockout stoppage. You're talking about a guy who, quite frankly, is just very slick, is very hard to deal with. He's a veteran. He's been in with explosive punchers. Quite frankly, he's been in with bigger punchers than hard hitter Karim Mayfield. Now, this fight is a 10-rounder. It might surprise people to know that Mayfield has never gone past 6 rounds. Not only that, the majority of Mayfield's fights have been in the Bay Area, where I live, right? As I said, he's generating buzz here. But this fight is going to be in Austin, Texas. In other words, Mayfield's not going to have the home bout advantage. Also, if you look further on Mayfield's record, you'll see some problems, right? Mayfield hasn't exactly fought top shelf competition. He hasn't fought Berto and Oscar De La Hoya, Demetrius Hopkins, but yet Mayfield in shorter fights, right, has had some problems. One of his fights was a split decision win. Another fight was a majority decision, right? These were against fighters who aren't as slick as Steve Forbes, who has been training with boxing royalty trainer Emanuel Stewart, same trainer who, of course, trains heavyweight champion Vladimir Klitschko and who currently trains, believe it or not, 2 of the champions at 154 pounds, Cornelius Brundage and Miguel Cotto, right? In addition to others, like heavyweight contender Chad Dawson. So you're talking about a veteran here who is probably going off at even money or as an underdog, right? Who has a great trainer, who is tested, who hasn't looked bad in the ring, and he's fighting a young guy who hasn't gone 10 rounds, right? Who isn't that young himself. He's 30, and who doesn't have the kind of volume that creates problems for a fighter like Steve Forbes. And of course, a fighter whose ambush style isn't exactly judge friendly because of the lower volume. So, Karim Mayfield may have a very bright future. I just think he's picked the wrong opponent here. This fight is going to be on ESPN. Sometimes these younger fighters will pick very difficult matches simply to get on TV. And I understand Karim Mayfield has just signed a deal with a new promotional group, and I'm sure he wants to make a splash, and I applaud the fighter for taking on a tough challenge. I just think that this challenge is too tough. There's certain guys in the sport who you really need to be careful of. Steve Forbes, quite frankly, is one of them. Any fighter who has fought top shelf competition, who himself has been a former IBF champion, who somehow has done that without getting knocked out, and who has a chance, quite frankly, to put himself back in the mix, is a dangerous opponent. I like Steve Forbes in this one. The way I would straddle it would be to take Steve Forbes straddled against the over, right? This way you're protected if it goes to a decision and the judges give it to Karim Mayfield. Let me know what you think. Leave your comments for me here on YouTube. Visit us at gamblersadvisory.com. If I had to make one bet on this fight, it would be to take Steve Forbes to win it. Let me get your thoughts. Thanks for watching.